I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. You ever wonder what happens when a mother's love meets the harsh reality of her children's financial decisions? Well, let me tell you about the time my son broke my husband's finger because we wouldn't co-sign a loan for his wife's dream house. But the real shocker, what happened at the bank the very next day? Trust me, you'll want to stick around for this one, because if you think your family's dramatic, just wait. My name is Patricia Williams, and Sunday dinners at our house have always been the highlight of my week. There's something magical about having everyone gathered around the table. My husband James carving the roast, our grandkids sneaking extra rolls, and the comforting chaos of family conversation filling every corner of our modest dining room. After 34 years of marriage, these moments are what I live for. This particular Sunday started like any other. I was in the kitchen putting the finishing touches on my garlic mashed potatoes, James's favorite, when I heard the front door swing open, followed by the pitter-patter of little feet racing down the hallway. "Grandma!" Elijah's voice rang out as he barreled into the kitchen, his 5-year-old sister Zoe not far behind. "We brought dessert!" I wiped my hands on my apron and bent down to gather them both in a hug. "Well, aren't you two just what I needed today?" I said, kissing the tops of their heads. Their father, my son David, appeared in the doorway, a bakery box in his hands and a tired smile on his face. "Mom," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. "Smells amazing in here." But it was Ashley, my daughter-in-law, who caught my attention. She was practically buzzing with an energy I couldn't quite place, her smile a little too wide, her eyes a little too bright. In the 15 years I'd known her, I'd learned to recognize when she was up to something. "Patricia!" she exclaimed, giving me a hug that felt more performative than genuine. "I hope you didn't go to too much trouble. Everything looks absolutely perfect." There was something about the way she emphasized perfect that made me pause. I've always prided myself on reading people. 30 years as an elementary school teacher will give you that skill, and something was definitely up with Ashley. "It's just pot roast," I replied, watching her carefully. "Nothing fancy." James walked in from the garage, wiping his hands on a rag. At 58, he was still as handsome as the day I met him, though his dark hair had given way to distinguished salt and pepper. "David!" "Ashley, kids are getting bigger every week, I swear." He swooped down to scoop up Zoe, who squealed in delight as he spun her around. As I watched them all, I felt that familiar wave of gratitude wash over me. This was what mattered. Family, together, safe. Little did I know that in less than an hour, our peaceful Sunday dinner would explode into chaos. We gathered around the table, plates piled high with pot roast, mashed potatoes, and green beans. James had just finished saying grace when Ashley cleared her throat, a signal I'd come to recognize over the years as her way of commanding attention. "So," she began, reaching into her oversized designer purse, "David and I have some exciting news." My first thought, I'm embarrassed to admit, was that she might be pregnant again. But instead of an ultrasound photo, Ashley pulled out a stack of glossy brochures and placed them right in the center of the table, nearly knocking over the gravy boat. "We found our forever home," she announced, her voice pitched with excitement. She began spreading the brochures across the table like a dealer at a casino, each one showcasing a house that looked like it belonged in a magazine. I exchanged a quick glance with James, whose fork had paused midway to his mouth. The homes in those brochures weren't just houses. They were mansions. 3 stories of gleaming windows, sprawling lawns, and what appeared to be a swimming pool in the backyard of one. "It's in Oakwood Heights," Ashley continued, naming one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in our city. 4 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, a gourmet kitchen with marble countertops, and the most incredible backyard for the kids. The schools are top-rated, and it's only 15 minutes from David's office. David was nodding along, pride evident in his expression. It's perfect, Mom. Everything we've ever wanted. I took a sip of water, trying to process what I was seeing. David was a mid-level manager at a tech company. Comfortable, but not Oakwood Heights comfortable. And Ashley had been between jobs for the past few months, though she hadn't volunteered that information. I'd heard it from my friend Martha, whose daughter worked at the same marketing firm. It looks beautiful, I said carefully. Congratulations. When do you close? Ashley and David exchanged a look, and I knew instantly that this wasn't just a casual announcement. There was more coming, and my stomach tightened in anticipation. Wait, don't, David said, clearing his throat. That's actually why we wanted to talk to you both today. We've been pre-approved for most of it, but we just need you two to co-sign on the loan, Ashley finished, her voice as casual as if she were asking us to pick up the kids from school. The lender wants a little extra security given the current rates, and since you've owned your home outright for years, it would just be a formality. The table went quiet. Even Elijah, who had been loudly negotiating a green bean for dessert trade with his sister, seemed to sense the sudden tension in the room. I looked at James and saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. That's a big ask, James said finally, his voice measured. Co-signing isn't something to be taken lightly. It would make us equally responsible for the loan. Ashley's smile didn't falter, but I noticed her knuckles whiten as she gripped her fork a little tighter. It's really just a formality. Our income more than covers the payments. The bank just wants an extra layer of security since it's our first home purchase at this price point. I knew my husband well enough to see the warning signs. The slight furrow between his brows, the way his shoulders had squared. He was preparing to say no. And given the determined look on Ashley's face, this wasn't going to end well. How much are we talking about here? James asked, reaching for one of the brochures. The house is listed at $650,000, David replied. We have 20% for the down payment saved up, so we'd be financing $520,000. I nearly choked on my water. $500,000. That was more than 3 times what our house had cost. And we'd struggled with those payments in the early years. Son, James said slowly, that's a substantial commitment. What's the interest rate they're offering? Just under 6%, David said, which is actually pretty good in the current market. James nodded thoughtfully, but I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. He'd spent his entire career as a structural engineer, and numbers were his second language. So you're looking at monthly payments of what? Around $3,500 just for the mortgage? Not counting property taxes, insurance, utilities, maintenance? Ashley jumped in. We've done the math, James. We can handle it. There was an edge to her voice now. The first hint that this conversation wasn't going as she'd planned. I'm sure you think you can, James replied, his tone still even. But have you factored in the unexpected? What happens if one of you loses your job? If the house needs a major repair? If there's a medical emergency? David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Dad, we're not kids. We've thought this through. Have you? James asked. And now there was a sharpness to his words that made me wince. Because co-signing means if you can't make those payments for any reason, we're on the hook. Our credit, our retirement, everything we've worked for over 40 years would be at risk. Ashley's smile had disappeared completely. We're not asking you to make the payments. We're just asking for your signature. Which is the same thing in the eyes of the bank, James countered. I decided to try a gentler approach. What David's father means is that we want to help, but we need to be careful about financial entanglements, especially at our age. We're thinking about retirement, healthcare costs as we get older. So you don't trust us, Ashley cut in, her voice flat. That's not what my mom said, David replied, but I could see he was getting frustrated too. I placed my hand on James's arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. Maybe we could look at other options. Perhaps a slightly smaller house to start with, or waiting until Ashley's back working full-time. The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I'd made a mistake. Ashley's head snapped up, her eyes flashing with anger. "Who told you I wasn't working?" David looked surprised. "What? Mom, Ashley's still at Crawford Marketing." I felt heat rise to my cheeks. I thought Martha mentioned something about downsizing at Crawford. "Martha should mind her own business," Ashley said coldly. "I'm on a project-based contract now. More flexibility, same pay." The atmosphere at the table had shifted from tense to frigid. James, never one to back down when he felt strongly about something, shook his head. "Look, the bottom line is that I'm not comfortable co-signing a loan of this size. It's not about trust, it's about financial prudence. I've seen too many families torn apart by money issues." David pushed his plate away, his food barely touched. "Dad, this is our dream house. We may not get another chance at something like this in that neighborhood." "Then maybe it's not the right house for you right now," James replied firmly. "Dreams are important, son, but so is living within your means." That's when Ashley stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "This is exactly why we hesitated to ask you. You've always thought David wasn't good enough, that he couldn't measure up to your standards." "Ashley," I started, but she wasn't finished. "You live in this modest house and drive your 10-year-old car and think everyone should live by your outdated values. Well, guess what? We want more for our children. We want them to have the best schools, the best opportunities." James's face had gone red, a vein pulsing at his temple. "There's nothing wrong with living within your means. It's not about being flashy or keeping up with the Joneses. It's about security, about building something solid." "Dad," David interjected, standing up as well. "That's enough. Ashley's right. You've always been like this. Afraid to take risks, afraid to dream big." I watched in dismay as the Sunday dinner I'd spent hours preparing descended into chaos. Zoe had started to cry, confused and frightened by the raised voices, while Elijah sat frozen, his eyes wide. "Please," I said, trying to regain control of the situation. "Let's not do this in front of the children. Maybe we could talk about this another time, when everyone's calmer." But James wasn't backing down. "No, Patricia. They need to hear this. I've worked too hard for too many years to jeopardize our future on a house that's clearly beyond their means." David slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes rattle. "Beyond our means? You have no idea what we're capable of. You're still treating me like I'm 16. "Then stop acting like it," James shouted back. "Acting impulsively, wanting everything handed to you on a silver platter." In the midst of this escalating argument, no one noticed Elijah reach across the table for the breadbasket. His small arm stretched too far, knocking over his glass of milk. The white liquid spread across the table, soaking into the glossy house brochures and dripping onto Ashley's designer pants. "Look what you did," Ashley snapped at the boy, who immediately began to sob. I jumped up to grab a towel, my heart breaking at the sight of my grandson's tears. "It was an accident, Ashley. He's just a child." David had moved to comfort his son, while James was using his napkin to mop up the spilled milk. That's when it happened. The moment that would change everything. As James reached across the table, David made a sudden movement to grab one of the soaked brochures. Their arms collided, and I heard a sickening crack, followed by James's cry of pain. He pulled his hand back, and we all stared in horror at his index finger, which was bent at an unnatural angle. "Jesus, Dad, I'm sorry!" David exclaimed, his face draining of color. "I didn't mean to—" James cradled his injured hand, his face white with pain. "It's broken," he said through clenched teeth. "God damn it, it's broken!" The room exploded into frantic activity. I rushed to the freezer for ice, wrapping it in a dish towel and pressing it gently to James's swelling finger. Ashley was hurrying the children out of the dining room, while David stood frozen, horror etched on his face. "We need to get you to the emergency room," I said to James, who nodded stiffly, his breathing shallow. "I'll drive you," David offered, guilt evident in his voice. "No," James said sharply. "Your mother will take me." The hurt that flashed across David's face made my heart ache, but this wasn't the time to soothe feelings. James needed medical attention, and the tension between him and David was still too raw. "Take care of the kids," I told David as I helped James to his feet. "We'll call you from the hospital." The drive to the emergency room was silent, save for James's occasional hiss of pain when the car hit a bump. I wanted to say something, to comfort him, to make sense of what had just happened, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I reached over and placed my hand on his knee, a gesture that said what I couldn't. "I'm here. We'll get through this." It wasn't until we were sitting in the crowded waiting room, surrounded by the Friday night parade of injuries and illnesses, that James finally spoke. "I didn't handle that well," he admitted, his voice low. I squeezed his uninjured hand. "None of us did. But they can't afford that house, Patricia. You know they can't." I nodded slowly. "I know. And deep down, they probably know it too." James sighed, wincing as he shifted his injured hand. "Ashley's not still working at Crawford, is she?" The question caught me off guard. "Martha said there were layoffs 3 months ago. Ashley was one of them." "And she didn't tell David?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe she did. Maybe she didn't. But I do know they've been using credit cards more than they should. David mentioned having to juggle some accounts when we had lunch last month." James closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the wall. "And they want us to co-sign a $500,000 loan. Jesus." We sat in silence for a moment, each lost in our own thoughts. I couldn't stop seeing the look on David's face when James refused. Disappointment, anger, but underneath it all, a flash of relief, as if part of him had wanted us to say no. "I'm worried about them, James," I said finally. "This isn't just about the house. Something's not right." Before he could respond, a nurse called his name, and we were ushered into an exam room. The X-ray confirmed what we already knew: a clean break of his index finger. As the doctor splinted the finger and gave instructions for care, I couldn't help thinking about how quickly things had spiraled out of control. It was nearly midnight by the time we got home. The house was dark and quiet, the dining room still showing signs of our disastrous dinner. Plates with half-eaten food, tipped-over glasses, and damp brochures crumpled on the table. "Leave it," James said when he saw me eyeing the mess. "We'll deal with it tomorrow." But as exhausted as I was, I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep with the chaos lingering. So while James took his prescribed pain medication and went to bed, I stayed up, cleaning away the physical evidence of our family's fracture. As I wiped down the table, my phone buzzed with a text from David. "Is Dad okay?" I typed back, "Broken finger, but he'll be fine. How are the kids?" The response came quickly. "Shaken up. Elijah thinks it's his fault." My heart sank. Poor Elijah, 7 years old and thinking he was responsible for his grandfather's injury. I texted back, "Tell him it was an accident and Grandpa isn't mad at him. We love you all." There was a long pause before the reply came. "We love you too, Mom." No mention of the loan, the argument, or what would happen next. But those 4 words, "We love you too," gave me hope that whatever was broken tonight could eventually be mended. I finished cleaning in a daze of exhaustion and emotional drain. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I resolved to get to the bottom of whatever was going on with David and Ashley. Their financial situation was clearly more precarious than they were letting on, And if they were willing to risk our relationship over this house, there had to be something bigger at stake. Sleep came fitfully that night, my dreams filled with broken fingers and houses that grew larger and more ominous with each room I entered. I woke at dawn to find James already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, his splinted finger propped awkwardly on a cushion. "I didn't hear you get up," I said, pouring myself a cup. "Couldn't sleep," he replied. "Pain kept waking me." I sat down across from him, studying his face. Despite the pain medication, he looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual. "I'm going to call David today," I said. "I think we need to understand what's really going on." James nodded. "I was thinking the same thing. But maybe we should go a step further. Let's go with him to the bank, run the numbers ourselves." I raised my eyebrows in surprise. "You think he'd agree to that?" "I think if we approach it the right way, not as a challenge but as support, he might. Because if they really can afford this house, I'll reconsider. But I need to see the numbers." I reached across the table and squeezed his uninjured hand. After 34 years of marriage, James still had the capacity to surprise me with his capacity for growth and change. "I'll call him after breakfast," I said. But before I could, my phone rang. It was David. "Mom," his voice sounded strained. "I need to talk to you. Alone." The emphasis on alone sent a shiver of apprehension down my spine. "Of course," I replied. "Is everything all right?" There was a long pause. "No," he finally said. "It's not. Can I come over? Ashley's taking the kids to her mother's for the day." "Come for breakfast," I suggested, glancing at James, who was watching me with concern. "I'll make those blueberry pancakes you love." Another pause. "Dad's not going to want to see me." "Your father loves you, David. He's hurt, physically and emotionally. But he loves you." "I broke his finger, Mom." "It was an accident," I insisted. "Please come. We need to talk about this as a family." After what felt like an eternity, he agreed. "I'll be there in an hour." As I hung up, James raised an eyebrow. "He's coming over?" I nodded. "For breakfast. And James, something's wrong. I can hear it in his voice." James sighed, looking down at his splinted finger. "Well, this family certainly knows how to do Sunday dinner with a bang. Let's see if we can make breakfast less eventful." Despite his attempt at humor, I could see the worry in his eyes. Whatever was going on with our son, we were about to find out, and I had a feeling it was going to be more complicated than a loan for a dream house. I busied myself with breakfast preparations, finding comfort in the familiar routine. As I mixed batter and sliced fruit, my mind kept returning to Ashley's face when I mentioned her job. There had been something there. Not just anger, but fear. The kind of fear that comes when a carefully constructed facade is in danger of crumbling. The doorbell rang precisely an hour later. James went to answer it, and I heard the murmur of male voices in the hallway. Awkward, hesitant, but not hostile. A good sign. When they entered the kitchen, David looked like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were rimmed with red, his normally neat hair disheveled. He approached me cautiously, as if unsure of his welcome. "Mom," he said simply, and the wealth of emotion in that one word nearly broke my heart. I pulled him into a hug, feeling his body sag against mine. For a moment he wasn't a 32-year-old man with children of his own, but my little boy seeking comfort after a fall. "It's going to be okay," I whispered, though I had no idea if that was true. We sat down to breakfast, the three of us navigating around the elephant in the room. I served pancakes, James poured coffee, and David made small talk about the weather. It was painfully normal, like actors performing a scene of family harmony. Finally, as we finished eating, David put down his fork and took a deep breath. I need to tell you both something, he began, his voice unsteady. And I need you to just listen, without interrupting. Can you do that? James and I exchanged a glance, then nodded. Ashley lost her job 3 months ago, David said, confirming what I'd already suspected. There were layoffs at Crawford, and she was one of the first to go. She's been looking for something new, but marketing jobs are scarce right now, and she's been freelancing to bring in some income, but it's not steady. He paused, running a hand through his hair. We've been using credit cards to cover the gap, and things have gotten out of hand. We're maxed out on 3 cards, and the minimum payments are killing us. I've been picking up extra projects at work, trying to make ends meet, but it's not enough. My heart sank as I listened. This was worse than I'd feared. The house, David continued, his voice breaking slightly. It wasn't just a dream home for us. It was a way out. Ashley found out that the owners were willing to offer a rent-to-own arrangement with a smaller down payment if we could get a cosigner. We thought if we could get into a better school district, in a neighborhood where Ashley could network with higher-income families, she'd have a better chance at landing a good job. He looked up, his eyes shining with unshed tears. I know it sounds crazy now, saying it out loud, but we were desperate. Are desperate. James, who had been listening intently, finally spoke. Why didn't you come to us sooner, son, before things got this bad? David's laugh was hollow. Pride? Shame? Not wanting to admit I couldn't take care of my family? Take your pick. We're your parents, I said gently. We would have helped. I know, David replied, his voice small. That's actually why I'm here. I'm going to the bank today to see exactly what our options are. The real options, not the fantasy ones Ashley and I have been clinging to. And I was hoping you would come with me, Dad. You've always been better with the financial stuff. I held my breath, watching James's face. This was a monumental ask, given what had happened the night before. But to my relief, James nodded. I'll come, he said simply. But I want your mother to join us too. She's got a good head for the practical realities that numbers sometimes don't show. David looked at me, relief evident in his face. Thanks, Mom. Dad, I don't deserve this after last night. Family isn't about deserving, I told him firmly. It's about loving each other through the hard times, even when we make mistakes. And so, an hour later, the 3 of us found ourselves sitting in the office of Sophia Rodriguez at First National Bank. Sophia, a poised woman in her 50s with a warm smile and keen eyes, had been my friend since college, long before she became a financial advisor. Patricia, James, she greeted us, her smile faltering slightly as she noticed James's splint. And this must be David. What can I help you with today? David squared his shoulders. I need to understand my financial options. My wife and I have been looking at a house, but I think we need to take a step back and assess our situation realistically. Sophia nodded approvingly. That's a wise approach. Let's start by looking at your current financial picture. Income, expenses, debts, assets. Then we can discuss what kind of home purchase might be feasible for you. For the next hour, David laid bare the details of their financial situation, with Sophia inputting the numbers into her computer. As the picture became clearer, I felt a growing sense of alarm. They weren't just struggling, they were on the brink of financial disaster. Their credit card debt totaled over $30,000, with interest rates above 20% on most cards. Ashley's inconsistent freelance income barely covered the minimum payments. And the house they'd been looking at? Even with the rent-to-own option, the monthly payment would have been nearly 60% of their current income. David, Sophia said gently when she'd finished her analysis, based on what you've shared, I can't in good conscience recommend any home purchase at this time. Your priority needs to be paying down that high-interest debt and stabilizing your income situation. David's face fell, though I could tell this wasn't entirely unexpected. So what should we do? We're drowning in these credit card payments. Sophia tapped a few more keys on her computer. There are several options. A debt consolidation loan might help, though with your current debt-to-income ratio, the interest rate wouldn't be ideal. Another option would be to work with a nonprofit credit counseling service. As Sophia outlined the various paths forward, I watched David closely. The initial disappointment had given way to something else. Relief, as if a weight was being lifted from his shoulders with each practical suggestion. "What about our current living situation?" he asked. "Our lease is up in 2 months, and the landlord is raising the rent. We can barely afford it as it is." Sophia frowned. "That does complicate things. Would moving in with family temporarily be an option while you get back on your feet?" David glanced at us, a question in his eyes. Before I could speak, James cleared his throat. "Son, you know you and your family are always welcome in our home. It would be tight, but we could make it work until you're back on solid ground." I nodded in agreement, though the thought of having 2 additional adults and 2 children in our 3-bedroom house was daunting. David shook his head. "I appreciate that, Dad, but I don't think Ashley would, it would be a lot to ask of everyone." "There's another option," Sophia interjected. "A multi-generational housing arrangement. Not necessarily moving in together, but finding a duplex or a house with an in-law suite that you could share. It would reduce costs for everyone while maintaining some privacy." As she spoke, I could see the wheels turning in James's mind. "Like Margaret Johnson's place," he said suddenly. "She's been talking about renting out the top floor of her house since her husband passed. It's a completely separate unit, 2 bedrooms, its own kitchen." "Margaret from church?" I asked, surprised. Margaret was a 68-year-old widow who lived in a beautiful old Victorian that had been converted into 2 apartments. She'd mentioned at the last church potluck that she was considering renting out the upper floor, but was nervous about having strangers in her home. "She'd feel better renting to someone she knows," James continued. "And it's in the same school district the kids are in now, so they wouldn't have to change schools." David looked thoughtful. "How much would she charge?" "Knowing Margaret, probably below market rate," I replied, "especially for a family from the congregation." "It's worth looking into," Sophia agreed. "And it would allow you to focus on paying down that debt without the pressure of rising rent." By the time we left the bank, a plan was beginning to take shape. David would talk to Margaret about the apartment. We would help them with the security deposit if needed. And most importantly, David would have an honest conversation with Ashley about their financial reality. As we stood in the parking lot, David turned to his father. "Dad, about last night, I'm so sorry. About your finger, about what I said, all of it." James looked at his son for a long moment, then pulled him into a one-armed hug. "We all say things we don't mean when we're scared, son. And we were all scared last night. Scared of different things, but scared nonetheless." I watched them, these 2 men I loved more than life itself, and felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Ashley would likely resist the idea of letting go of the dream house, of potentially moving into Margaret's apartment. There would be more difficult conversations, more tears, more adjustments. But in this moment, standing in a bank parking lot on a Monday morning, I could see the first step toward healing, both financial and familial. What none of us knew then was that the biggest shock was yet to come, because Ashley was keeping one more secret, one that would change everything. But that revelation would have to wait until we got home, where an unexpected visitor was waiting on our doorstep. The drive home from the bank was quieter than the journey there, each of us lost in our own thoughts. David sat in the back seat, his fingers tapping restlessly against his knee as he stared out the window. I caught glimpses of his reflection in the rearview mirror. Worry etched into the lines of his face, making him look older than his 32 years. "She's going to be so angry," he finally said, breaking the silence. James adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, careful of his splinted finger. "Ashley's a smart woman, David. Once she understands the situation, you don't understand," David interrupted. "This house, it's not just a house to her. It's everything she's ever wanted. The symbol that we've made it." He made air quotes with his fingers, his voice tinged with bitterness. I turned in my seat to face him. Where does that pressure come from? Has Ashley always been so focused on appearances? David sighed, running a hand through his hair. Her parents, mostly. They've always had the big house, the fancy cars, the country club membership. Growing up, Ashley was surrounded by wealth, and then her dad lost everything in the financial crisis. They went from living in a mansion to a 2-bedroom apartment overnight. "So this is about security for her," I said, understanding dawning. "It's about proving she hasn't failed," David replied softly. "That she's reclaimed what her family lost." James caught my eye, a silent communication passing between us. This wasn't just about a house or a loan anymore. It was about deeper wounds, insecurities that money couldn't fix. As we turned onto our street, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked in front of our house, a sleek silver BMW that screamed expense and status. "That's Ashley's car," David said, his voice suddenly tight. "What is she doing here? She was supposed to be at her mother's with the kids all day." James pulled into the driveway, and before he had fully stopped, David was opening the door, his body tense with apprehension. As we approached the front porch, I saw her, Ashley, sitting on our steps, her designer sunglasses hiding her eyes, but not the tight set of her jaw. "Ashley," David said, surprise evident in his voice. "Where are the kids?" "Still at my mom's," she replied, standing up and brushing invisible dust from her immaculate white pants. "I dropped them off and came straight here. We need to talk." Her gaze shifted to James and me, and I could feel the chill in her assessment. All of us. Inside, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Ashley perched on the edge of our sofa, back straight, hands folded in her lap, the picture of controlled composure, except for the slight tremor in her fingers. "I know where you've been," she said once we were all seated. "To the bank. Without me." David shifted uncomfortably. "Ashley, I needed to understand our options." "Our options?" she interrupted, her voice rising. "You mean you needed to have your parents tell you what to do, like always?" "That's not fair," I interjected, trying to keep my voice calm. David came to us for support, not to be told what to do. Ashley turned to me, removing her sunglasses to reveal eyes rimmed with red. She'd been crying. "With all due respect, Patricia, this is between me and my husband. You've always babied him, and now he's running to mommy and daddy instead of standing by his wife." James leaned forward, his face flushed. "Now listen here." "No, you listen!" Ashley cut him off, her voice cracking with emotion. "You have no idea what we're going through. No idea what it's like to watch your children grow up in a neighborhood where the schools are falling apart, where there are shootings 3 blocks away. To lie awake at night wondering if you're failing them because you can't afford to move somewhere safer." Her words hung in the air, heavy with a truth we hadn't fully appreciated. David reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Ash, please," he said softly. "Let me explain what we learned today. That we can't afford the house? That we're drowning in debt? That I need to give up on my dream of giving our children the life they deserve?" Her voice was bitter, laced with tears she refused to shed. "I already know all that, David. I'm not stupid." "Nobody said you were," I said gently. but sometimes we need a fresh perspective to see a way forward. Ashley laughed, a hollow sound that held no humor. A fresh perspective. Is that what you call it when you go behind my back to discuss our finances with strangers? Sophia's not a stranger, David replied. She's a financial advisor who gave us some solid options. Options like what? Ashley demanded. Moving in with your parents? Downsizing to an even smaller apartment? Please enlighten me on these wonderful options. David took a deep breath. Actually, Dad had an idea about Margaret Johnson's place, the upper floor of her house. Margaret Johnson? The widow from your church? Ashley's expression was incredulous. You want us to move in with a senior citizen? It's a completely separate apartment, James explained, his tone measured. 2 bedrooms, its own entrance and kitchen, and it's in a safe neighborhood with good schools. Ashley stood up abruptly, pacing the small living room. This is unbelievable. We're talking about a house in Oakwood Heights one day, and the next you're suggesting we become lodgers in some old lady's attic. It's not an attic, I corrected, feeling my patience wearing thin. It's a beautiful, spacious apartment, and Margaret is a lovely woman who would be a wonderful neighbor. For who? For you? Ashley fired back. Because she's your age? Your friend? Is that the plan? To keep us all under your watchful eye? To make sure David never fully grows up? I felt the sting of her words, but before I could respond, David stood up, his face flushed with anger. That's enough, Ashley. My parents are trying to help us, which is more than I can say for your mother, who knows exactly what we're going through but hasn't offered a dime. It was a low blow, and we all knew it. Ashley flinched as if she'd been slapped. Leave my mother out of this, she whispered. She has her own problems. So do we, David exclaimed. We're drowning, Ashley. The credit cards, your job situation, the lease ending. We're in serious trouble here, and I'm tired of pretending we're not. Ashley's composure finally cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she sank back onto the sofa. You think I don't know that? You think I enjoy lying awake at night, wondering how we're going to make it? I'm scared, David. I'm so scared. The raw honesty in her voice shifted something in the room. The anger and defensiveness gave way to a shared vulnerability that even I could feel. David sat down beside her, placing a tentative arm around her shoulders. I'm scared too, he admitted. That's why I went to the bank today. Not to go behind your back, but to face reality so we could figure this out together. Ashley leaned into him, her body seeming to deflate. I'm pregnant, she whispered. The words landed like a bomb in the middle of our living room. David froze, his arms still around her shoulders, his eyes wide with shock. You're what? He stammered. 12 weeks, she said, wiping at her tears. I found out last month. I was waiting for the right time to tell you. But then the landlord said he was raising the rent, and I started looking at houses, and then... She gestured helplessly. Everything spiraled. I exchanged a glance with James, whose expression mirrored my own mix of surprise and concern. Another baby. No wonder Ashley had been so desperate for a larger home, for stability, for security. Why didn't you tell me? David asked, his voice barely audible. Because I was terrified, Ashley cried. We can barely manage with 2 kids. How are we supposed to handle 3? And now I can't find a job, and we're up to our eyeballs in debt, and... She dissolved into tears again. The revelation changed everything. Suddenly, Ashley's desperate push for the house, her emotional reaction to our refusal to co-sign, her fear, it all made sense. She wasn't just being materialistic or status conscious. She was a mother trying to create security for a growing family. I moved to sit on Ashley's other side, hesitantly placing my hand on her back. To my surprise, she didn't pull away. "Oh, sweetheart," I said softly. "No wonder you've been so stressed." "I've ruined everything," she sobbed. "Our finances, our relationship with you and James, everything." "You haven't ruined anything," James said firmly, surprising us all. He moved to sit on the coffee table directly in front of Ashley, his injured hand cradled in his lap. "Life happens, babies happen, and families, real families, pull together when times get tough." He looked at David. "Your mother and I had our own financial crisis when you were born. Did you know that?" David shook his head, his arm still around Ashley. "I lost my job 3 months before your due date," James continued. "The firm downsized, and suddenly we had no income, a mortgage, and a baby on the way. We were terrified." I smiled at the memory, as painful as it had been at the time. "We had to swallow our pride and move in with my parents for 6 months while your father found a new job and we got back on our feet." "You never told me that," David said. "Because it wasn't something we were proud of," James admitted. "But looking back, it was one of the best decisions we ever made. My father-in-law taught me more about financial management during those 6 months than I'd learned in my entire life. And your grandmother," he smiled at me, "taught us both about what really matters when you're raising a family." Ashley had quieted, listening intently through her tears. "What does matter?" she asked, her voice small. "Safety, love, stability," I answered. "And those things don't come from the size of your house or the neighborhood you live in. They come from knowing you have people who will catch you when you fall." Ashley wiped her eyes. "But the children, they deserve better than what we can give them right now." "What they deserve are parents who aren't stressed to the breaking point," James said gently, "who aren't working themselves to death to maintain a lifestyle they can't afford. Trust me, that's more important than a big backyard or a fancy address." David took Ashley's hand. "We should look at Margaret's place. Just look. No commitments. But if it's safe and clean and gives us some breathing room financially, wouldn't that be worth considering? At least until we get the credit cards paid off and you find a new job?" Ashley hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I guess we could look." The tension in the room eased slightly. It wasn't a resolution, not yet, but it was a beginning, an acknowledgement that the path forward would require compromise and honesty. "There's something else we need to discuss," I said carefully. "The baby. You're going to need support, especially with 2 other little ones at home." Ashley's hand moved protectively to her still flat stomach. "We've managed before." "But you don't have to do it alone," I insisted. "James and I are retired now. We have time. We can help with childcare, with school pickups, with whatever you need." "Without judgment?" Ashley asked, her gaze direct and challenging. "Because I can't handle more criticism right now, Patricia. I just can't." I felt a pang of guilt, wondering how often my well-intentioned advice had come across as criticism. "Without judgment," I promised. "Just support." James nodded in agreement. "And speaking of support, let's talk about a real financial plan, not just for the immediate crisis, but for the long term." For the next hour, we talked, really talked, about options, possibilities, and practical steps. James suggested a meeting with Richard Thompson, a financial counselor from our church who specialized in helping families in crisis. David and Ashley agreed to make an appointment. I brought up the possibility of Ashley taking online courses to enhance her marketing skills while job hunting, something she could do from home on her own schedule. The spark of interest in her eyes gave me hope. By the time we broke for lunch, the atmosphere had transformed. The anger and defensiveness had given way to cautious cooperation. It wasn't perfect. Ashley still tensed when James mentioned cutting up credit cards, and David grew defensive when I suggested they might need to sell one of their cars. But it was progress. As I made sandwiches in the kitchen, Ashley appeared in the doorway, her face still showing the aftermath of tears, but more composed. "Can I help?" she asked hesitantly. "Sure," I replied, pushing the loaf of bread toward her. "You can slice these tomatoes if you don't mind." We worked in silence for a few moments, the only sound the rhythmic chopping of Ashley's knife against the cutting board. "I'm sorry," she said finally, not looking up from her task. "For what I said earlier, about you babying David. That wasn't fair." I set down the knife I was using to spread mustard. "And I'm sorry if I've ever made you feel judged or criticized. That was never my intention." Ashley nodded, still focused on the tomatoes. "I know. It's hard sometimes. Being compared. Your house is always so perfect. Your finances so organized. David grew up with this example of how things should be, and I feel like I can never measure up." Her words surprised me. "Perfect? Ashley, this house is 40 years old. The roof leaks when it rains too hard. The kitchen cabinets are from 1982. We drive cars that are over a decade old." "But you're happy," she said simply. "You and James, you have this contentment that I've never been able to find. No matter what we buy, what we achieve, it never feels like enough." I moved to stand beside her, gently taking the knife from her trembling hands. "Contentment isn't something you find outside yourself, dear. It's something you cultivate. And it takes time." "What if I can't?" Ashley whispered, finally meeting my eyes. "What if I'm always chasing the next thing, the bigger house, the better job? What if I pass that on to my children?" The vulnerability in her question touched me deeply. This wasn't the polished, confident Ashley who usually breezed through our Sunday dinners with designer clothes and perfect hair. This was a woman terrified of repeating patterns she'd seen in her own upbringing. "The fact that you're asking the question means you're already breaking the cycle," I told her, "and you won't be doing it alone." A noise from the doorway made us both turn. David stood there, watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Everything okay?" he asked. Ashley nodded, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Yeah, just having a little mother-in-law, daughter-in-law heart-to-heart." David raised his eyebrows, clearly surprised, but pleased. "Well, don't let me interrupt. I just came to see if lunch was ready. Dad's getting a bit hangry out there." I laughed, the sound breaking the last of the tension. "Tell him 5 more minutes, and remind him that patience is a virtue." As David disappeared back to the living room, Ashley turned to me with a hesitant smile. "I'd like to see Margaret's apartment, if she's willing to show it to us." "I'll call her this afternoon," I promised, feeling a surge of hope. It was a small step, but an important one. After lunch, David and Ashley prepared to leave, needing to pick up the children from Ashley's mother's house. As they gathered their things, James pulled David aside for a private word, while Ashley and I stood by the door. "I really am sorry about James's finger," she said quietly. "It was an accident," I assured her. "And between you and me, he's kind of enjoying the attention. He made me butter his toast this morning." Ashley's laugh was small but genuine. "David feels terrible about it." "I know, but they'll work it out." I hesitated, then added, "And congratulations, by the way, on the baby. That's wonderful news once we get everything else sorted." Her hand moved unconsciously to her stomach. "I'm still getting used to the idea myself. It wasn't planned." "The best things in life rarely are," I replied with a smile. David and James rejoined us, and there was an awkward moment as we all stood in the entryway, no one quite sure how to end this emotionally charged visit. "So," David said finally, "we'll call Richard for an appointment, and you'll talk to Margaret about seeing the apartment?" James nodded. "And I'll start putting together some numbers for a debt repayment plan. Nothing binding," he added quickly, seeing Ashley tense. Just some options to consider. Thank you, Ashley said, and I could tell the words didn't come easily to her. For not giving up on us. Your family, I said simply. That's what family does. As their car pulled away from the curb, I felt James's arm slip around my waist. Well, he sighed. That was intense, I supplied. Exhausting? Emotionally draining? All of the above, he agreed, but also necessary, and maybe even healing. We watched until their car disappeared around the corner, then went back inside, both of us feeling the weight of the morning's revelations. A baby, James said, shaking his head as he sank into his armchair. That explains a lot. It does, I agreed, sitting across from him. But it also complicates things. They'll need more space, more help, more resources. Margaret's place has 2 bedrooms, James pointed out. It would be tight with 3 kids, but doable for a year or 2 while they get back on their feet. I nodded, though I wasn't entirely convinced. Ashley's pride is going to make this difficult. She's used to a certain lifestyle, a certain image. Pride doesn't pay the bills, James said a bit sharply. Then his expression softened. But I get it. It's hard to step back, to admit you can't have what you want right now, especially when you're young and you think life should be moving forward, not backward. I studied my husband's face, the lines of worry around his eyes, the gray at his temples that hadn't been there a decade ago. You were hard on David at dinner Sunday night, I observed. Harder than I've seen you be in a long time. James sighed, looking down at his splinted finger. I saw myself in him, Patricia. The mistakes I almost made when we were young. Remember when we were looking at that house in Lakeview? The one we couldn't afford but convinced ourselves we could somehow make work? I did remember. It had been our dream house, too. 4 bedrooms, a sun-filled kitchen, a yard big enough for David to play in. We'd come so close to overextending ourselves financially, seduced by the vision of the life we thought we should have. My father talked me out of it, James continued. Not gently either. He laid out the numbers, showed me exactly what would happen if I lost my job, or if you had complications after David was born that kept you from going back to teaching. I was so angry with him at the time. But he was right, I said softly. He was right, James agreed. And thank God for it. When I did lose my job, if we'd had that mortgage hanging over our heads, he shook his head, we might have lost everything. I moved to perch on the arm of his chair, running my fingers through his hair. You're a good father, James Williams, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. He leaned into my touch. I just hope they take the help we're offering. Real help, not just a signature on a loan document. They will, I said with more confidence than I felt. They're scared right now, but they're also relieved. I could see it in both their faces when we were talking about practical solutions. James caught my hand, pressing a kiss to my palm. When did you get so wise, Patricia Williams? Oh, I've always been wise, I teased. You just don't always notice. His chuckle was warm against my skin. I notice more than you think. The moment was interrupted by the ringing of the telephone. I reluctantly moved away from James to answer it. Hello? Patricia, it's Margaret Johnson. The warm, slightly husky voice of our friend came through the line. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all, Margaret. In fact, I was planning to call you later today. Oh? Well, that's fortuitous. I'm calling because I finally decided to rent out my upstairs apartment, and I wanted to ask if you knew any reliable tenants. Someone from the church, perhaps? I'd feel so much better renting to someone I know. I caught James's eye, unable to keep the smile from spreading across my face. Actually, Margaret, I might know the perfect family. My son David, his wife Ashley, and their children might be looking for a place. There was a pause on the other end of the line. David and Ashley? With the 2 adorable children? Elijah and Zoe, if I recall correctly. That's them. And actually, they're expecting a third child in about 6 months. Oh my! Well, the apartment does have 2 bedrooms, which might be a bit snug for 5, but certainly doable for a young family starting out. And it would be lovely to have children in the house again. It gets so quiet since Harold passed. We chatted for a few more minutes, arranging for David and Ashley to see the apartment the following day. When I hung up, James was watching me with a bemused expression. "Sometimes I think you have a direct line to a higher power," he said. "Margaret calling right when we need her to." "Just good timing," I replied, though I couldn't help but feel a sense of divine intervention myself. "She's going to show them the apartment tomorrow afternoon." "Do you think Ashley will go for it? It's a far cry from Oakwood Heights." I considered the question carefully. "I think she'll be surprised. Margaret's house is beautiful. That Victorian charm, the stained glass windows, the garden out back. It's not a McMansion, but it has character. And more importantly, it's safe. The neighborhood is full of families and older couples, with that park just a block away." "And the rent?" James asked, always practical. "Margaret didn't say exactly, but she mentioned she was more interested in having the right tenants than in making a profit. I suspect it will be well below market rate." James nodded thoughtfully. "That could make a huge difference for them. If they could reduce their housing costs by even a few $100s a month, they could start making real progress on those credit cards." We spent the rest of the afternoon making calls. James to Richard Thompson about financial counseling for David and Ashley, me to my friend Sophia at the bank to thank her for her help that morning. By evening, a tentative plan was taking shape, though much would depend on David and Ashley's decisions in the coming days. As we prepared for bed that night, I found myself thinking about the baby, our 3rd grandchild, unexpected but already changing the family dynamic in profound ways. "Penny for your thoughts?" James asked as he carefully maneuvered his nightshirt over his injured hand. "I was just thinking about the new baby," I admitted, turning down the covers. "How life has a way of forcing us to face reality, ready or not." "Life or tiny humans?" James replied with a chuckle. "They do have a knack for cutting through the nonsense and making us focus on what matters." "Do you think David and Ashley will be okay?" I asked, voicing the concern that had been lurking beneath the surface all day. "Not just financially, but as a couple?" James was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think they have a chance. Better now that everything's out in the open. Secrets and financial stress. That's a combination that destroys marriages." I nodded, thinking of the raw honesty I'd witnessed between David and Ashley today. The hurt, the fear, but also the connection that still existed beneath the strain. "They have us," I said finally. "Whatever happens, they won't face it alone." James pulled me close as we settled into bed, his arm warm around my shoulders. "No, they won't. And that might make all the difference." As I drifted towards sleep, I found myself mentally rearranging our spare room, wondering if we should convert it to a nursery for when the new baby visited. A fresh coat of paint, perhaps, and that old rocking chair from the attic. But those were thoughts for another day. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The apartment viewing with Margaret, David and Ashley's first meeting with the financial counselor, and the ongoing process of healing the wounds, both new and old, that had been exposed during our family crisis. For now, it was enough to know that we had faced reality together and found, if not answers, at least a path forward. And in family life, sometimes that's the best you can hope for, not perfection, but progress, not grand solutions, but small steps in the right direction. I fell asleep to the sound of James's steady breathing, his splinted finger resting lightly on my hip, and dreamed of a house with many rooms, where every door opened to welcome those in need of shelter. The next morning dawned with a clarity that felt symbolic after the emotional storm of the previous day. Sunlight streamed through our kitchen windows as I prepared breakfast, casting warm patterns across the worn tile countertop. James sat at the table, awkwardly trying to read the newspaper with one good hand, his splinted finger propped on a cushion. "Need me to turn the page, old man?" I teased, setting a cup of coffee in front of him. He looked up with a mock glare. "I'm managing just fine, thank you, though I might need help with the butter on my toast." "Of course you will," I replied, rolling my eyes fondly. The morning banter felt normal, comforting after the intensity of recent events. "Margaret called while you were in the shower," James said, abandoning his newspaper struggle. "She's excited about showing the apartment to David and Ashley this afternoon. Says she's been baking all morning." I smiled, picturing Margaret bustling around her kitchen, flour on her cheeks, determined to make a good impression. At 68, she had the energy of someone decades younger, channeling her grief over Harold's passing into community service and church activities. "That woman will kill them with kindness," I said, sliding a plate of eggs in front of James. "And butter. Have you tasted her shortbread?" "Only about 1,000 times," James replied, spearing a piece of egg. "Do you think they'll show up?" Ashley seemed resistant yesterday. The question had been circling in my mind since I'd woken up. "David texted this morning. They'll be there at 2. He says Ashley is open-minded but nervous." "Nervous is better than hostile," James observed. "It's progress," I agreed, sitting down with my own breakfast. "I'm thinking of stopping by, not for the viewing itself, but afterward." "To see how it went." James raised an eyebrow. "Giving them space but hovering nearby? Very mother-in-law of you." "I prefer to think of it as being supportive while respecting boundaries," I replied primly. We finished breakfast discussing practical matters. When James should schedule a follow-up appointment for his finger, whether we should replace the leaking faucet in the guest bathroom, if we had enough room in the garage for the crib and changing table we'd stored after David outgrew them. Normal, everyday concerns that grounded us after the emotional upheaval. After cleaning up the kitchen, I called Richard Thompson to confirm he could meet with David and Ashley later in the week. Richard, a retired bank executive who now volunteered as a financial counselor at our church, had helped several families in the congregation navigate financial crises. "I've got them scheduled for Thursday at 4 p.m., he told me, his deep voice reassuring even through the phone. "And Patricia, don't worry. I've seen couples in much worse shape turn things around. The fact that they're willing to seek help is half the battle." "Thank you, Richard," I said, feeling some of the tension ease from my shoulders. "They're good kids, just a bit overwhelmed right now." "Aren't we all from time to time?" he replied philosophically. "That's why community matters. We catch each other when we fall." After hanging up, I busied myself with household tasks, trying not to watch the clock as 2 o'clock approached. James retreated to his workshop in the garage, his thinking space where he tinkered with woodworking projects. I knew he was giving me space to process everything, in his own quiet way. At 1:30, I could no longer pretend I wasn't anxious about the apartment viewing. I changed into a casual but neat outfit, applied a touch of lipstick, and grabbed my purse. "I'm heading out," I called to James, "just going to run a few errands." He appeared in the garage doorway, sawdust clinging to his shirt, a knowing look on his face. "Margaret's house is not an errand. I have other stops to make," I protested weakly. "Uh-huh." His smile was gentle. "Go, but give them time to form their own impressions before you show up." "I'll wait until at least 2:45, I promised. Margaret's Victorian home was located in what locals called the Garden District, a charming neighborhood of older homes with established trees and well-maintained yards. Just 3 miles from our house, it was a far cry from the exclusive gates of Oakwood Heights, but it had character, history, and most importantly, a strong sense of community. I deliberately took my time, stopping at the grocery store and the pharmacy before driving slowly past Margaret's house at 2:40. David's sensible Honda was parked out front alongside Ashley's BMW, which looked somewhat out of place on the modest street. Deciding to give them a bit more time, I parked a block away and walked to Garfield Park, a small green space where children's laughter rang out from the playground. I sat on a bench watching a group of young mothers chat while their toddlers played in the sandbox. This would be a good place for Elijah and Zoe, I thought. Safe, accessible, the kind of neighborhood park where children formed friendships that could last a lifetime. At precisely 3 o'clock, I made my way to Margaret's house, rehearsing in my mind how to appear casually surprised at running into David and Ashley there. As I approached the grand old Victorian with its wraparound porch and gingerbread trim, I spotted them, David, Ashley, and Margaret, standing in the front yard, gesturing toward the separate entrance that led to the upper apartment. Ashley's body language caught my attention immediately. Unlike the defensive posture she'd maintained throughout much of yesterday, she was open, engaged, nodding as Margaret pointed out features of the property. Even from a distance, I could see her genuine smile. "Mom?" David noticed me first, waving me over with a surprised expression. "What are you doing here?" So much for my casual encounter plan. "Just finished some errands and thought I'd see how the viewing went," I admitted. No point in pretending now. "Patricia!" Margaret enveloped me in a warm hug that smelled of vanilla and cinnamon. Perfect timing. I was just showing these two the garden. The previous tenants neglected it terribly, but I've been working to bring it back. Ashley approached, looking more relaxed than I'd seen her in months. "Patricia, have you seen the apartment? It's incredible." Her enthusiasm took me by surprise. "I haven't been upstairs in years," I confessed. "You have to see it," Ashley insisted, grabbing my hand. The light in the living room, the built-in bookshelves, the window seat in what would be the kids' room. It's like something from a magazine. David caught my eye over Ashley's shoulder, giving me a subtle thumbs up. Whatever resistance she'd felt yesterday had apparently melted away upon seeing the actual space. Margaret beamed at Ashley's excitement. "Why don't you show Patricia around while I finish setting up some refreshments? David can help me carry the tea tray." Before I could protest, Ashley was pulling me toward the separate entrance at the side of the house, her steps quick and eager. As we climbed the stairs to the second-floor apartment, she spoke rapidly, pointing out details. "Look at this woodwork. It's original to the house. And wait until you see the kitchen. It's small, but it has these amazing vintage cabinets that someone restored." The apartment was indeed charming, a testament to the craftsmanship of a bygone era, updated just enough for modern comfort. Sunlight poured through large windows, illuminating hardwood floors that gleamed with age and care. The living room flowed into a dining area with built-in china cabinets, and beyond that, a compact but efficient kitchen with updated appliances. "It's only 2 bedrooms, Ashley acknowledged as she led me down a short hallway. "But look how spacious they are." The master bedroom had enough space for a king-sized bed and dresser, with a small ensuite bathroom. The second bedroom, clearly intended for the children, featured a charming window seat beneath a bay window that overlooked the garden. "Zoe would love this," Ashley said softly, running her hand along the cushioned seat. "She's always wanted a special place to read her books." I watched her carefully, still trying to reconcile this enthusiastic Ashley with the woman who'd been so set on a house in Oakwood Heights just days ago. "It's a beautiful space," I agreed. "Very different from what you were looking at before, but it has so much character." Ashley's smile faded slightly. "You mean it's old and small compared to the other house?" "That's not what I said." She sighed, sitting down on the window seat. No, but it's what you're thinking. And you're right. It's a huge adjustment from what I imagined for us. She placed a hand on her still flat stomach. But when Margaret mentioned the garden and how the children could help her plant vegetables, and how there's a retired teacher next door who runs a little reading group for neighborhood kids, I started to see a different kind of life here. I sat beside her, careful not to push. What kind of life? A simpler one, Ashley admitted. Less focused on appearances and more on, I don't know, community, I guess. Connection. She laughed softly. God, that sounds so cheesy, but I keep thinking about how I grew up before my dad lost everything. We had the big house, the fancy cars, the country club membership, but we never knew our neighbors. My parents were always working to maintain that lifestyle, and when it all came crashing down, there was no community to catch us. Her insight surprised me. I'd underestimated Ashley's self-awareness, assuming her fixation on the dream house was purely materialistic. It's not cheesy at all, I told her. Those things, community, connection, they're what sustain you when life gets hard. And life always gets hard at some point. Ashley nodded, her eyes distant. The rent is less than half what we're paying now. Margaret says she cares more about having the right tenants than making money. With what we'd save, she looked at me directly. We could pay off the credit cards in 18 months, according to David's calculations. Maybe less if I can find a decent job. That would be life-changing, I said, careful to keep any hint of judgment from my voice. It would. She stood, walking to the window to look out at the garden below. And the schools here are actually better than where we are now. Not as prestigious as Oakwood Heights, but they have strong arts programs and smaller class sizes. I joined her at the window where we could see David and Margaret setting up a tea tray on the garden patio. They were laughing about something, comfortable in each other's company. You know, I said carefully, moving here wouldn't have to be forever. It could be a stepping stone, a chance to regroup, rebuild your finances, and then move forward from a position of strength. Ashley considered this, her expression thoughtful. That's what David said, that we're not giving up on our dreams, just postponing them until we're truly ready. She turned to me with unexpected vulnerability in her eyes. Do you think we're making the right choice? Be honest, Patricia. The question touched me deeply. Not just the words, but the fact that she was asking for my opinion at all. It felt like a fragile bridge forming between us, one I was careful not to damage with my response. I think, I said slowly, that the right choice is the one that brings your family peace instead of stress. That creates a foundation you can build on, rather than a facade that might crumble. And from what I've seen of this place and of Margaret, I think you could find both peace and community here. Ashley nodded, seeming to absorb my words. David loves it, I can tell, and the kids would too. She smiled ruefully. It's just my pride that's the problem, admitting we need to take a step back, that we can't have everything we want right now. Pride is a heavy thing to carry, I replied. Sometimes setting it down makes room for joy you didn't expect to find. She laughed softly. When did you get so wise, Patricia? Oh, I've always been wise, I teased, echoing my words to James. Some people just take longer to notice. We made our way back downstairs to join David and Margaret in the garden, where a tea service had been laid out on a wrought iron table beneath a flowering dogwood tree. Elijah and Zoe, who must have arrived while we were upstairs, were already exploring the garden paths, their excited voices carrying in the afternoon air. Mom, Elijah called, running over when he spotted me. Grandma Pat, did you see the treehouse? Mr. Harold built it, and Ms. Margaret says we can use it if we live here. I caught him in a hug, my heart full at the excitement in his voice. I didn't see it yet. Maybe you can show me after tea? Can we, Mom? He asked, turning to Ashley. Can we show Grandma the treehouse? Ashley ruffled his hair affectionately. Of course, buddy, but let's have some of Ms. Margaret's cookies first, okay? As we gathered around the table, I observed the easy interaction between Margaret and my grandchildren, the way she listened intently to Zoe's elaborate story about a butterfly she'd seen, the gentle way she showed Elijah how to properly hold his teacup, like a gentleman. David caught my eye across the table, giving me a subtle nod that spoke volumes. They'd made their decision. This would be their new home, at least for now. The realization filled me with a quiet joy, not because they'd taken a path I approved of, though I did believe it was the wisest choice, but because I could already see a weight lifting from both David and Ashley. The desperate, cornered look that had haunted their eyes was giving way to something like hope. After tea, while the children showed me the treehouse and Margaret took Ashley to see the shared laundry facilities in the basement, David pulled me aside. She loves it, Mom, he said quietly. I've never seen her flip so completely. It's like, I don't know, like she finally let herself want something simpler. Sometimes we don't know what we really want until we see it, I replied. You seem pretty taken with the place yourself. David nodded, looking around at the garden, the sturdy old house, the quiet street beyond. It feels right, and the numbers make sense. We'd be paying less for a nicer place in a better neighborhood. Have you discussed the details with Margaret? We're signing the lease on Friday, he confirmed. First and last month's rent, no security deposit since she knows us from church. We can move in next weekend. Our current lease ends at the end of the month, but the landlord's happy to let us out early since he's already got new tenants lined up at the higher rate. The speed of it all took me by surprise. That's quick. We don't want to risk losing the opportunity, David explained. And honestly, Mom, now that we've made the decision, we just want to move forward. Start fresh. I understood the impulse. Once you've faced a hard truth and chosen a new path, there's often an urgency to act, to make concrete what might otherwise remain theoretical. You know your father and I will help with the move, I offered. And anything else you need. David's smile was tinged with something like relief. Thanks, Mom. We might take you up on that. Especially with Ashley being pregnant, she shouldn't be lifting anything heavy. How is she feeling? Physically, I mean. Better now that the first trimester is almost over. The morning sickness hasn't been as bad as with Zoe, thankfully. He lowered his voice. But emotionally, it's been rough. She blames herself for our financial situation, for pushing so hard for a house we couldn't afford. It takes two to create debt, I pointed out gently. You both made those decisions. I know, and I've told her that. But Ashley, she's harder on herself than anyone else could ever be. I nodded, recognizing that particular trait. It was one that Ashley and I actually shared, though I doubted she'd appreciate the comparison. This move will help, I assured him. Having a concrete plan, seeing progress as you pay down the debt, it makes a huge difference psychologically. That's what Richard said when I spoke to him on the phone yesterday. He's going to help us create a debt payoff strategy that won't leave us feeling deprived. His exact words were, sustainable but serious. The thoughtful planning, the careful consideration of both practical and emotional aspects, it was a level of maturity I hadn't always seen in my son. Perhaps this crisis, as painful as it had been, was pushing him to grow in ways that comfort never could have. I'm proud of you, David, I said, surprising myself with the sudden emotion in my voice. Of both of you. It takes courage to change course, to admit when something isn't working. He looked away, but not before I caught the sheen of tears in his eyes. Thanks, Mom. That means a lot. Our conversation was interrupted by Elijah's excited shout from the treehouse. Dad, come see. There's a secret compartment up here. David grinned. Duty calls. We should wrap up soon anyway. Ashley has a job interview at 5:30. A job interview? Already? Margaret's niece works at Wellington Marketing. When Ashley mentioned she was looking, Margaret made a call. It's just a preliminary meeting, but it's something. I watched as David jogged over to the treehouse, his long legs easily climbing the wooden ladder to join his son in the shaded refuge among the branches. The sight filled me with a warm nostalgia. How many times had I watched a much younger David in our own backyard treehouse, lost in imaginative worlds of his own creation. Now here he was, a father himself, creating new memories with his own children. Life's circle continuing, even through the hard times. Especially through the hard times. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. David and Ashley met with Richard Thompson, who helped them create a detailed financial plan that included emergency savings, debt repayment, and a modest budget for baby preparations. They signed the lease with Margaret, began packing their apartment, and started the process of untangling the financial mess they'd created. James and I found ourselves pulled into the momentum, helping in ways both practical and emotional. James spent a Saturday with David, mapping out the new apartment and determining what furniture would fit and what needed to be sold or stored. I took the children for an overnight stay so Ashley could rest and pack without interruption. It was during this sleepover that I had a particularly meaningful conversation with Zoe, my precocious 5-year-old granddaughter with her mother's determination and her father's sensitive heart. "Grandma," she asked as I tucked her into bed in our guest room, "are we poor now?" The question caught me off guard. "What makes you ask that, sweetheart?" She twisted the edge of the blanket between her small fingers. "I heard Mommy talking on the phone. She said we have to be careful with money now, and we're moving to a smaller house. Tommy at school says when people move to smaller houses, it's because they're poor." My heart ached at the worry in her young voice. "Well, Tommy doesn't know everything," I said gently. "Moving to a smaller house doesn't make you poor. It makes you wise." Zoe's forehead wrinkled in confusion. "Wise?" "Yes, wise. It means making good choices that help your family be happy and healthy. Your mom and dad are making wise choices about where to live so they can take care of you and Elijah and the new baby in the best way possible." She considered this, her eyes serious. "But Mommy's sad about moving." I heard her crying. The revelation stung. Despite Ashley's enthusiasm at Margaret's house, she was clearly still struggling with the reality of their situation. "Sometimes grown-ups can feel sad about a change even when they know it's the right choice," I explained. "Change is hard for everyone, but you know what? I bet your mommy would feel better if she knew you were excited about the new house. About the window seat in your new room and the treehouse in the garden." Zoe's expression brightened. "And Miss Margaret said I could help her bake cookies every Friday." "See? There are lots of wonderful things about this move. And you know what else? Your family isn't poor, Zoe. You're rich in all the ways that really matter. You have parents who love you, grandparents who adore you, a brother to play with, and a new baby sister or brother coming soon. And Bunny," she added seriously, clutching her well-loved stuffed rabbit. "And Bunny," I agreed with a smile. "The very best kind of wealth is love, and your family has that in abundance." Satisfied with this explanation, Zoe snuggled down into her pillow, Bunny tucked securely under her chin. "Grandma, will you tell me a story about when Daddy was little?" I settled into the chair beside her bed, heart full. "How about the time your daddy decided to build a boat out of cardboard boxes and sail it in the bathtub?" Her giggles were the perfect end to the day. The following weekend was moving day. James and I arrived at David and Ashley's apartment early, armed with coffee, donuts, and a determination to make the day as smooth as possible. We were joined by a small army of helpers, friends from church, colleagues of David's, and even Ashley's younger brother, who'd driven up from his college town to lend a hand. The mood was surprisingly festive as boxes were loaded, furniture disassembled, and vehicles filled to capacity. Even Ashley, who I'd worried might struggle with the physical reality of the move, seemed energized, directing operations with clipboard in hand, her pregnancy still barely visible beneath her oversized t-shirt. The Wellington interview went well, she told me as we packed kitchen items into boxes. It would be a step down from my previous position, but the hours are flexible and the office is only 10 minutes from Margaret's. That sounds promising, I replied, wrapping a coffee mug in newspaper. Have they made an offer? Not yet. They want me to come in for a second interview next week, but the hiring manager seemed impressed with my portfolio. She carefully placed a stack of plates into a box. 6 months ago, I would have been insulted by the salary they're likely to offer. Now I'm just grateful for the opportunity. I nodded, understanding the shift in perspective. It's amazing how quickly our definition of enough can change. That's exactly it, Ashley said, looking up in surprise. What felt like settling before now feels like, sufficiency, security. Both good things, I offered, especially with a baby on the way. She placed a protective hand on her stomach, a gesture I recognized from my own pregnancies, that instinctive need to shield, to connect. We had the ultrasound yesterday. Everything looks healthy. Did you find out if it's a boy or a girl? A smile spread across her face, genuine and warm. A girl, another daughter. Her eyes filled with unexpected tears. I keep thinking about that window seat in what will be the girls' room, how she and Zoe will sit there together, reading books, telling secrets. I reached across the box to squeeze her hand. Creating memories that will last a lifetime. Better than any granite countertop or walk-in closet, Ashley admitted with a watery laugh. God, when did I get so sentimental? Is it the pregnancy hormones, or am I actually growing as a person? Probably both, I replied with a smile. Growth and hormones often go hand in hand. By mid-afternoon, the apartment was empty, and the caravan of vehicles made its way to Margaret's house, where she waited on the porch with lemonade and sandwiches for the moving crew. The children ran immediately to the garden, their excited voices carrying through the open windows as the adults began the process of moving boxes and furniture up the separate staircase to the second-floor apartment. I found myself working alongside Ashley as we unpacked kitchen items, arranging them in the vintage cabinets according to her precise instructions. There was something different about her today, a lightness I hadn't seen in years. The defensive edge that had often characterized our interactions was notably absent. I need to apologize to you, Patricia, she said suddenly, pausing with a stack of bowls in her hands. For what? I asked, genuinely puzzled. For how I've acted toward you. For years, really, keeping you at a distance, being defensive, sometimes downright rude. She placed the bowls carefully on a shelf. I always felt judged by you, like I wasn't good enough for David, for your family. The confession stunned me. Ashley, I know, she interrupted gently. I know that now. It wasn't you judging me. It was me judging myself and projecting that onto you. You were this perfect mother figure, organized, financially responsible, content with a modest lifestyle. Everything I struggled to be. I laughed softly at her characterization. Oh, Ashley, if you only knew the mess behind the curtain. I've made so many mistakes, had so many moments of doubt and insecurity. Really? She looked genuinely surprised. Really, when David was about Elijah's age, I was so overwhelmed trying to balance teaching and motherhood, that I forgot to pay our mortgage. For 2 months, James had to take out a personal loan to catch us up before the bank started foreclosure proceedings. Ashley's eyes widened. I had no idea. Of course not. We don't usually advertise our failures, do we? We present the polished version of ourselves to the world. But believe me, everyone has their struggles. She nodded thoughtfully. I've been so focused on keeping up appearances that I lost sight of what actually matters. It took this whole financial disaster to make me see clearly. Sometimes that's what it takes, I acknowledged. A crisis has a way of cutting through the noise. We worked in companionable silence for a while, the sounds of furniture being moved and children playing creating a pleasant backdrop to our task. We're naming her Isabella, Ashley said suddenly. The baby, Isabella Grace Williams. That's beautiful, I replied, touched that she would share this with me. It was my grandmother's name. She was the one who taught me to bake, to sew, to garden, all the practical things my mother never had time for. Ashley's expression softened with memory. She lived simply, but her home was always warm, always welcoming. I'd forgotten how much that meant to me until I saw this place, saw how Margaret has created that same kind of warmth here. I could picture it clearly, a young Ashley finding refuge in her grandmother's simple home, learning skills that connected her to something real and enduring. How strange and wonderful that life had brought her full circle, back to a place where those values could be rediscovered and passed on to her own children. Isabella will be lucky to grow up in a home filled with that kind of warmth, I said. Ashley smiled, her hand moving to her stomach in that now familiar gesture. Yes, she will. The day continued with the organized chaos that characterizes any move. Boxes in the wrong rooms, furniture that suddenly seemed too large for the space, missing items that eventually turned up in unlikely places. By evening, though, the apartment had taken shape, not fully unpacked, but livable, with beds assembled and the kitchen functional. As the helpers departed with thanks and promises of pizza next time they needed a favor, our immediate family gathered in the new living room, exhausted but satisfied. David and James were discussing the best placement for the television, while Elijah and Zoe explored every nook and cranny of their new home with the boundless energy of childhood. I found Ashley standing at the window, looking out at the sunset that painted the old oak trees with golden light. "Penny for your thoughts?" I asked, echoing James's familiar phrase. She turned with a smile. "I was just thinking that for the first time in months, maybe years, I'm not feeling anxious about money, about status, about what other people think." She gestured around the apartment. "It's not what I thought I wanted, but it's exactly what we need." "The best outcomes often come from the most unexpected detours," I replied. "You know what's funny?" Ashley continued. "I was so resistant to this move, so afraid of what it would mean. But now that we're here, I feel free, like I can breathe again." Before I could respond, there was a knock at the door. Margaret stood in the doorway, a covered dish in her hands. "I don't want to intrude," she said, her warm voice carrying into the room. "But I thought you might appreciate a home-cooked meal after such a busy day. It's just a simple chicken casserole, nothing fancy." "That's so thoughtful," Ashley exclaimed, moving to take the dish. "Please join us. We have plenty of drinks, and I'm sure I can find some plates in one of these boxes." "Oh, I don't want to impose on your first night." "You're not imposing," David assured her, joining us at the door. "You're our first dinner guest. That makes it special." Margaret's face lit up with pleasure. "Well, in that case, I accept. And I brought a little housewarming gift for the children, too." From behind her back, she produced 2 small potted plants, cheery yellow marigolds in colorful ceramic pots. "For your windowsills," she explained as Elijah and Zoe rushed over with excited exclamations. Every home needs a little growing thing to take care of. As Margaret stepped into the apartment, bringing with her the comforting aroma of home cooking and the gift of simple kindness, I caught James's eye across the room. His smile mirrored what I was feeling, a profound sense of rightness, of pieces falling into place. This wasn't the path any of us had expected, certainly not the one David and Ashley had planned. A broken finger, a financial crisis, a pregnancy announcement, a change of address. Each event a disruption, a shattering of expectations. Yet somehow, through it all, something new and hopeful had emerged. Not perfect, not solved, but moving in the right direction. Later that night, as James and I drove home in comfortable silence, the events of the past week still reverberating between us, he reached across the console to take my hand. "They're going to be okay, aren't they?" he asked, his voice soft in the darkness. I squeezed his fingers, careful of his healing injury. "Yes," I said with conviction. "They're going to be more than okay." Because I had seen it in the way David and Ashley moved around each other in their new space, more attuned, more collaborative than they'd been in years. I had heard it in the children's laughter as they explored their new home, already forming attachments to its unique character, and I had felt it in my own heart, that sense of family evolving, growing stronger through adversity rather than despite it. There would be challenges ahead, of course. A new baby would bring both joy and stress. Financial recovery would require discipline and patience. Old habits and insecurities wouldn't disappear overnight. But they had taken the first crucial steps. Facing reality, accepting help, making hard choices for long-term gain rather than short-term comfort. As we pulled into our own driveway, the modest home where we'd raised our son and built our life together, James turned to me with a tired smile. "What a week," he sighed, flexing his splinted finger. "From broken bones to new beginnings." "Life rarely travels in a straight line," I replied, leaning over to kiss his cheek. "But sometimes the detours lead us exactly where we need to go." 6 months later, on a crisp autumn evening, we gathered in the garden behind Margaret's house to celebrate two significant events: David's promotion to senior manager at his firm and the imminent arrival of baby Isabella, due in just 3 weeks. The transformation in those 6 months had been remarkable. The apartment above Margaret's house had become a true home, filled with warmth and personal touches that reflected a new set of priorities. Ashley had accepted the position at Wellington Marketing, quickly proving herself valuable enough to negotiate a 4-day work week that would continue after her maternity leave. With their reduced housing costs and 2 steady incomes, they had already paid off 1 credit card and were making significant progress on the others. But the most striking change was in Ashley herself. The woman who had once chased status symbols and external validation now spent weekend mornings helping Margaret in the garden, teaching Zoe to plant sunflower seeds along the fence, her pregnant belly round and prominent beneath her comfortable clothes. As we sat around the picnic table that evening, sharing a meal and stories and laughter, I watched my family with a full heart. James, his finger long healed, was showing Elijah how to whittle a small boat from a piece of pine. David was deep in conversation with Margaret's nephew about a community improvement project they were planning, and Ashley was beside me, both of us watching Zoe chase fireflies across the lawn as dusk settled over the garden. "I never thanked you properly," Ashley said quietly, her hands resting on her belly where Isabella occasionally made her presence known with a well-placed kick. "For what?" I asked, though I sensed what was coming. "For not co-signing that loan." She turned to meet my gaze directly. "If you and James had said yes, we would be drowning right now. House poor, stressed, probably fighting constantly about money. Instead, she gestured around at the peaceful scene before us. We found something better than what we thought we wanted. I reached over to cover her hand with mine. You found it yourselves. All James and I did was refuse to enable a path that would have led to more pain. Sometimes the best gift is saying no when yes would be easier, Ashley reflected. I didn't understand that before, but I do now. She smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. I might even be turning into you, Patricia. Yesterday I caught myself telling David we didn't need a new TV when the old one works perfectly fine. I laughed, delighted by her self-awareness. The horror! Next thing you know, you'll be clipping coupons and reusing gift bags. Already there, she confessed with a grin. Richard says we're ahead of schedule on our debt repayment plan. If we stay on track, we'll be completely credit card debt-free by next summer. That's wonderful, Ashley. Truly. She nodded, her expression growing more serious. We're thinking about what comes next. Not another move. We're happy here. And Margaret has practically adopted the kids as her grandchildren. But maybe starting a small college fund for each of them. Building some real savings. Eventually, when the timing is right, looking for a house we can truly afford. The thoughtful planning, the focus on long-term security rather than immediate gratification, this was the most profound change of all. Not just in their financial habits, but in their values, their vision for what made a good life. As if reading my thoughts, Ashley added softly, I used to think happiness was having the biggest house, the nicest car, the most impressive address. Now I know it's this. Family gathered around a table, children safe and happy, a community that supports each other through the hard times. That's a wisdom many people never achieve, I told her, genuinely proud of her journey. Better late than never, she replied with a rueful smile. Though I wish it hadn't taken a broken finger and a financial meltdown to get here. I laughed, remembering the chaotic Sunday dinner that had started it all. Sometimes the most important lessons come wrapped in the messiest packages. As the evening deepened into night, with stars appearing overhead and lanterns glowing along the garden paths, I found myself filled with a profound gratitude, not just for the resolution of a family crisis, but for the unexpected gifts it had brought. Stronger bonds, deeper understanding, and the kind of growth that only comes through facing difficult truths together. What began with a broken finger had led to healing of a different kind. Not just the mending of bone, but the restoration of relationships, the realignment of priorities, the rediscovery of what truly matters in creating a life of meaning and joy. And isn't that, after all, what family is for? Not to shelter each other from life's challenges, but to stand together as we face them, finding strength in shared vulnerability and wisdom in collective experience. To remind each other, when the way grows dark or uncertain, that love, patient, practical, persistent love, is the truest wealth we can ever possess. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below and let me know the city you're watching from. Don't forget to check out 2 other stories that are channel favorites. My daughter-in-law banned me from seeing my grandkids until I learned why, and I discovered my husband's secret bank account after 40 years of marriage.